Have you ever noticed that people in politics all talk a certain way? We see lots of hand movements, sentence stopping, and even cadences that come off as intelligent yet dishonest. Politics is just as much as a performance as it is a popularity contest. So let's look at some of the ways that our politicians communicate. When observing a politician speaking, we typically see a lot of hand movements. Constant hand movements are an example of a paralinguistic way to communicate passion and charisma, or even come off as more credible or dominant. Also, it can be to engage a crowd. For example, look at this clip with Nancy Pelosi. We see these exaggerated hand movements that are meant to show her passion and how important the TikTok ban is for her. But we can also sometimes forget that these politicians are almost always playing towards the crowd, and this is an example of engaging an audience through exaggerated movements. Another tactic used by politicians is the old, reliable, dramatic pause. And this may be for applause or to stress a specific point, but when a politician talks, they may put specific stress on a word by stopping their sentence. For example, let's look at the way that Obama was talking during his State of the Union. He talks and then pauses and then talks and then pauses. This way, it allows the audience to give a reaction, but it also slows the rate of his speech and gives him time to take a breath and let his voice be heard. This strategy combined with hand movements is how we can identify someone who is talking like a politician paralinguistically. But these are just the ways that they deliver their message. What about the message itself? Well, let's look at this clip from Trump.
Done more for the black community than Donald Trump. And if you look, with the exception of Abraham Lincoln, possible exception, but the exception of Abraham Lincoln, nobody has done.
Not only do we see virtue signaling with a vague support towards black people, even comparing himself to Abraham Lincoln, but we see that in his history, he has quite the opposite history. Virtue signaling is defined as, quote, the action or practice of highlighting one's morality through the use of language and other signs that index superficial alignment with progressive socio-political values. And this is from one of our readings in class. And virtue signaling is a very common tactic used by politicians. Finally, the longest thing to explain is that politician speech is almost a language in and of itself. It is compromised by everything that we have talked about before, as well as using certain words that may differ depending on parties. For example, some words that Republicans frequently use may be fake news, woke, DEI, illegal immigrants, snowflake, Democrat, Obamacare, and many more. And terms such as let's go Brandon or legalize comedy may seem innocuous to people outside of the Republican community, yet hold significant weight within it. These words have different contexts in different political structures. As the word DEI or woke holds a negative connotation to Republicans, yet a positive one for Democrats. There is also a cadence that we can see. For Republicans, most of them come from the Midwest, South, or just generally rural areas, and there is a slight country twang that we associate with Republicans. Republicans also come typically from business backgrounds, giving a cadence that may be similar to a person in business or an executive salesperson. Also, almost all Republicans are Christian, and a politician talks very similar to how a preacher may talk. This mix of country, business, and preacher is very common in Republicans, and in our minds is what we associate with an average Republican senator or representative. And each party, of course, has a very distinct sound. That is just an example of the features of the Republican indexicality. There is also other parties that have different traits to them as well. However, both share the features that we have said before, and we also must not forget that a lot of congresspeople come from wealthy, middle-class backgrounds. And when a politician talks, no matter from what party, we can hear undertones of persuasion, nationalism, and pride. And depending on their party, we may see further undertones. Regardless, both parties align with the idea of an L1 accent. According to Lippy Green, a usual aspect of the L1 language is sharing a geography, which may apply to certain political parties, but quote, there are also socially bound clusters of features which are superimposed on the geographic. And by most politicians sharing aspects of their background and sharing similar positions, this would lead us to think of the politician accent being an L1 accent. I hope I was able to explain that well. It can be very difficult to establish one uniform definition for an accent used by 535 people who all come from very, very different geographic backgrounds, as well as varying socioeconomic levels and identities. However, each party has their own terms that have different weights in different contexts, so I think it's very fair to say that politicians have a very different accent than others. And while there is no one-size-fits-all to explain the reason why politicians speak the way that they do, no matter where a congressperson is from, we see these paralinguistic and linguistic features all the time. Thank you for watching.